Yes, we begin, though, with a couple of legal stories with implications for President Trump and people in his orbit. According to newly released court documents, the FBI believed that then-candidate Donald Trump was closely involved in a scheme to hide hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign. The documents released yesterday from the closed campaign finance case against Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen described a series of calls, text messages, and emails among Cohen, Trump, Trump's campaign aide Hope Hicks, Keith Davidson, an attorney for Daniels, and David Pecker, an executive of the company that publishes the National Enquirer. It also revealed multiple calls between Cohen, Trump, and Hicks, including on October 26th, when Trump and Cohen spoke twice on the same day that Cohen would wire $130,000 to the attorney for Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, as payment for the agreement to secure her silence about their sexual affair. An FBI agent investigating the matter wrote that based on the timing of these calls and the context of these text messages and emails, I believe that at least some of these communications concerned the need to prevent Clifford from going public, particularly in the wake of the Access Hollywood story. In a statement from prison, Cohen said he and other members of the Trump Organization were directed by Mr. Trump to handle the Stormy Daniels matter, including making hush money payments. President Trump has denied having an affair with Daniels.
Let's bring in State Attorney from Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg, and former Justice Department spokesman and now on MSNBC Justice and Security Analyst Matt Miller. Matt, let me begin with you. We're talking about this closed case. Does that mean there's not going to be prosecution against the president for campaign finance violations on the Stormy Daniels affair?
Well, it seems like that's the case for now. Of course, the statute of limitations will continue to run until sometime in 2021. So I think one of the big questions is whether this case can be reopened if the president loses his reelection. I think you hit on, though, the big questions for me out of this. It's not so much, what we learned about the president lying to the public about his knowledge. I think we all already knew that. The big questions for me are, why did the Justice Department end this investigation? Did they end it because the president has immunity, the same way he did in the Mueller investigation, because he's a sitting president? Or did they end it because they didn't think there was enough evidence to charge him? And so they don't plan.
But Matt, we've talked about the implications of this, and for the FEC, we've talked about the implications of this for federal power, for a president's power. Again, it's circular logic. The president did this so he could get elected president of the United States. This Stormy Daniels porn star affair, the hush money, was all part of an effort for him to keep this to the side long enough to get elected president of the United States. If you have to do something that breaks federal campaign laws, which this clearly did, by any reading, any conservative or liberal reading of it, and that helps you get elected president of the United States, can you then say I can't be prosecuted because I am president of the United States, despite the fact that the act that is being examined is an illegal action that got you elected president of the United States? Because I can tell you this, I've known congressmen that were sent to jail for far less than this.
Yeah, members of Congress are unfortunate to not have the same OLC opinion that protects the president. Look, I agree with you absolutely, Joe. The problem is the Justice Department doesn't agree. And the Justice Department believes that as long as the president is sitting in office, he can't be prosecuted for anything. But I think
did we get that logic, though? I mean, because, again, I'm getting a little tired of Robert Mueller, getting a little tired of Robert Mueller, and getting a little tired of the Justice Department saying, oh, no, we're not going to prosecute the president. But we're not going to exactly tell you why we're not going to prosecute the president.
I think that's the key question. Look, as long as DOJ has that opinion, they need to answer these questions for Congress. If they believe that the president committed a crime here, and we don't know that's the case. We should be clear. We don't know why SDNY closed this investigation, and we don't know whether they did that on their own or whether Bill Barr had some role. And I think those are the questions Congress needs to insist on, because if the president is only escaped being indicted again, because I think this would be the second time because he's a sitting president, then DOJ needs to make that clear for Congress so Congress can decide whether they're going to take some action.
Well, Dave Ehrenberg, if you spend, what, $150,000, $160,000 to pay somebody off, and you're doing it so you can get elected to a position, I mean, if you did that and you campaigned for state attorney and funneled $160,000 to a third party because you knew if they had information that would defeat you at the polls in the coming weeks, and you didn't report that money, they found out later, somebody'd be prosecuting you. So are we here, and any congressman, any senator, any governor. So are we here once again at a place where the president's being prosecuted, but nobody will tell us why the president's not being prosecuted?
Yeah. Joe, as a member of Congress, you and I, as state attorney, don't have the benefit of that internal DOJ policy that forbids indicting a sitting president. And I think that is relevant here. There are a lot of things going on here, but Joe, I think that the public needs to know, and I agree with Matt that there needs to be public hearings about this. Especially, I want to know what Bill Barr's role is. Do you know, the revelations that came out yesterday did not reveal the role of the Attorney General. Do you know the investigation into these matters seemed to conclude 5 months ago? That was the last time the Southern District of New York had contact with the Trump Organization. That coincides with the swearing in of Bill Barr as U.S. Attorney General. Did he put his thumb on the scale? Did he put the kibosh on the investigation? These are things maybe Congress needs to investigate.
Well, and this is something that we said, Matt, a long time ago, that while we were concerned about Bill Barr lying, about mischaracterizing Robert Mueller's letter, the more frightening aspect of his new position and seeing himself as a defense lawyer for Donald Trump and not actually an acting attorney general for the people of the United States of America would be all of the prosecutions he decided to not pursue, or all the politically charged prosecutions he decided to pursue for the benefit of the president.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I find it suspicious that the Justice Department won't answer this question about who made the decision. Look, earlier this week, DOJ decided that they weren't going to bring charges against the police officer who was responsible for the death of Eric Garner in New York. And when they did that, the department made quite clear that it was the Attorney General who made that decision. It was his decision not to bring charges. In this case, they're refusing to answer questions. You look at all the DOJ reporters who are writing stories about this, none of them have been able to figure out whether this was the Southern District of New York's decision or whether Bill Barr was involved in some way. And I will tell you, as a former department spokesman, if the answer is a good one, usually you put it out to reporters. And so I have to be a little suspicious that the Attorney General had some role in this, and DOJ just doesn't want to tell the public what that was.
And just really quickly now, Jerry Nadler wants more information from Hope Hicks, who, if you look at this new information, it appears she did not disclose or she did not answer questions correctly to Congress. Joe, what are the ramifications of that, if true?
Well, it depends. Obviously, they're going to call her back, or
should she lie to Congress?
Well, we don't know that. But House Democrats now want her to come back to Congress and clarify her testimony to see what she knew and when she knew about what I will say right now certainly appears to be an illegal payoff to Stormy Daniels. Listen, I will just tell you this. If what the president did is okay, paying somebody off $160,000 to silence them in pursuit of getting elected to a federal office, if that becomes the new precedent, well, good luck ever getting any congressmen, congresswomen, senators, any other federally elected officials, good luck busting them on not reporting correctly, because, boy, gosh, this is a huge exception.
Yeah,
Joe,
Hope Hicks better clarify that.
Can I just jump in?
Let's move on.
Joe, I just want to jump in for a second.
Because we have another story we need to move on.
Okay,
Go.
I'm sorry. Joe, just really quickly, because I want to remind people, my friend Michael Cohen is going on his third month in jail. The only person in jail, the guy who was directed to do it on behalf of the president. And just very important, going back to one of Dave's point, is that there were meetings that were about to be set up with many people in the Trump Organization about the investigation of the Trump Organization. And exactly when Bill Barr showed up, those meetings were called off. So I think that needs to be looked at very, very hard.
I agree.
Well,
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.